Wasting no time, we begin with the D tier in Apex Legends. This for me contains those that are underwhelming, and there is a singular one here, the P2020. As with every season, the B20 isn't necessarily bad. The damage per mag is actually pretty decent, but the time to kill and the overall usability is just not there. The P20 is going to get beat out by a ton of other weapons, and I still think the best thing going for the P20 is that it's a holder for your light ammo attachments, which, to be honest, light ammo guns are not the greatest right now, and even this is a problem on its own. C tier are the fine and okay weapons, and the P20's big bro, the Mozambique, locks in this spot. The Mozam I find to be pretty underrated. It has incredible range where it can do a full 45 to 60 damage body hit up to 45 meters away, which is massive. This makes it very easy to get partial hits on enemies who are running away, and maybe you want just to spray and pray to try and get them knocked. The Mozambique's time to kill is fairly weak, and in general, when you pull your secondary, you either are looking for a fast time to kill weapon like an SMG, or a big damage per round weapon like the PK or maybe the Mastiff. And since the Beak doesn't do either of these, it does falter quite a bit when you do compare it to the rest of the meta. The next gun for me is probably the hardest weapon in the game to rank, and it is the Charge Rifle. The Charge has a massive star next to it, as it kind of depends on how you want to play the game. For most, it's a C tier weapon, as it is very difficult to use in the close range and even at the longer ranges, and when you run a charge over, say, a longbow or a sentinel, you're really giving up all close range viability, which is super tough. However, if you are in a slower ranked game and you are trying to purely farm damage and 4K games, then this gun is one of the best to do it. Get a 4 to 8 times on the charge, and if you are accurate, huge headshots can feel extremely rewarding. It's just that at the end game, everything gets to close range, and because of this, the Charge Rifle is just not going to be it when this happens. You'll want to swap off this thing before it does become too late. If you are purely farming damage in its early game, then this could be considered a high B, maybe even low A tier weapon. We now get to the weapons, which are just good, but still not amazing. Many of these guns lack in one or two areas, and this is keeping them from being rated any higher. The Spitfire or the Chopper gets a solid B as a pretty good all-around weapon in Apex Legends. The biggest reason the Spitty is not ranked any higher is going to be its fairly slow time to kill. When in closer ranges, it's very uncompetitive, and when you're at mid-range, other ARs are going to excel and beat it out. I find the Spitfire can be incredible if you are just outside of that SMG range. The Spitfire's greatest asset is going to be its massive mag, and I find this makes it a blast to use in pubs when you are pushing multiple teams in an area. There really is not anything better when you need to do a huge laydown of ammo, and you just hold down that trigger and chunk away groups of enemies into oblivion. Slightly switching gears, we have Season 21's buffed longbow. Straight up, the buffs for me were not enough to really make it matter. It's cool that it does not need a barrel stabilizer anymore, but let's be real. Was the recoil on the longbow ever a problem? I don't think so. Increased handling is nice, but I find the biggest problem of the longbow is its bullet velocity. The Sentinel feels way easier to use due to the rounds getting to its target faster. Because of this, it does have better range. I think the longbow works incredibly well if you are at a very specific range that is outside of the marksman range of 30-30 or a G7, but still close enough where you don't need to lead your shots. The longbow is also probably the most forgiving of the snipers, since you can continue to tap fire it if you are missing shots. If you struggle with your aim, you might want to turn to this weapon. The G7 Scout in a lot of ways does perform similarly to the longbow. It just shoots faster and of course does less damage per shot. I find the range at which it excels to be very similar to that of the longbow. However, I do find the G7 more attachment needy than the longbow. You really need a solid optic for it to perform well, unlike that longbow. I think the G7 is more versatile in close ranges, as you can spam it and get decent close range damage. Overall, and even more so than the bow, if you are struggling with your long range accuracy and you want what is the easiest marksman or damage farming weapon, the G7 is probably going to be one of the best for this. My next placement may be a little aggressive, but I find the R99 to be a pretty bad weapon comparably to what it used to be. Yes, the R9 is still a very decent fast killing weapon, but due to the seemingly dozens of nerfs it has gotten over the past couple seasons, I really just cannot recommend it anymore. Simply put, the damage output at its base mag and even at the level 3 magazine is just not worth the trouble. You basically cannot miss any shots on a blue armor enemy if you don't have a magazine, and even if you do have a purple mag and you're going up against a purple or red Evo enemy, you really can't miss any rounds or you're not going to kill them. You're going to have to reload. I still don't mind the R99, and if I can get that purple light mag off the drop, I probably will use it, but I'm pretty much always always going to drop it for a car SMG, which I find to be way more reliable. As we move on, let me know in the comments which weapons are you using the most this season and which class of weapons would you like to see get buffed. A tier is where the amazing ones are, and we have a lot of A tier weapons, which does show how relatively healthy the weapon meta in Apex Legends is, as I find most of these guns are pretty reliable even if they aren't the top tier. We will begin with a handful of care package weapons. The first is the EVA 8 shotgun. I have mixed feelings when it does come to this shotty. For one, if you are very close and you get full hits, this thing melts, but just because you need to be almost hugging the enemy, I think the EVA is just an A tier weapon, as its range is just too poor and the reliability I don't think is there. Yes, it's a shotgun, but at the end of it, I think some SMGs or the Havoc is simply just a better choice. If you like shotguns, then this thing is definitely viable. Just understand it requires a very specific playstyle, and it's probably more of a run and gun pub weapon. Second to the EVA is going to be the Bocek, also in the care package. I find the Bocek to be incredibly rare this season. Devotions are everywhere, but regardless, if you do get the Bocek, it is an incredible poking weapon, but I think the 60 rounds you get is just too low. If you get it early on, you'll have to swap weapons, and if you get it later on, then the ring is smaller and you don't really want the Bocek at this point. The Bocek still gives that semi-silent tap firing type of feel, and if you are looking for some quick damage farming, the Bocek I find can still be a really great marksman weapon. Sidebar though, I'd love to see us switch up the Bocekage and have it come out of the care package again. I think it might be time to make the care package feel a little bit more fresh. The Kraber for the moment will round out our care package weapons, and much like every season since its headshot damage nerf, I simply can't put it in S tier because it lacks one top capability at endgame when you do have a blue or purple helmet. Because of this, it can feel a little unreliable. Similarly to the Bocek, you will more than likely have to swap weapons, and this can also cause additional problems as endgame approaches. Don't get me wrong though, the Kraber is still a great high A tier weapon, and it can farm enemy shield resources, which is pretty good, and it can level up your Evo as well. It just isn't necessarily the weapon of choice if you are looking to truly sweat it out. A weapon that has had pretty much no changes in a long time is going to be the RE45, but due to the meta changing around it, I have bumped up the RE45 to A tier. Nerfs to SMGs have made this thing way more competitive, although it's kind of a bummer that the digital threat was removed from the game. Since the DT could only go on shotguns and pistols before, this did make it a little bit more unique. The RE45 to me has always been an odd one though. Its fire rate is actually kind of slow compared to the R9, and its total damage per mag is much lower than a Volt, but since the R9 was nerfed into oblivion, I think the RE45 is a fine option, and it kind of takes the R9 spot in the meta. The biggest thing going for this little side shooter is going to be its size. It's a pistol, and it has in turn great handling, reload, and overall feel. If you can't get your shot down with the RE45, then it is a pretty solid backup gun. The Mini Kraber is up, the Sentinel. I find this to be the most reliable of the snipers, and this is mostly because it can do a really nice 150 or so headshot, which is pretty high for a ground weapon. The Sentinel is really great at applying pressure, doing constant damage, and since you can't keep picking up ammo, you are not going to have that Bocek or the Kraber problem. The couple downsides to the Sentinel is that one, you will need to use shield cells to get the most out of it, and this can be a problem. It also slows down your gameplay when you do need to charge it up. Carrying more batteries is going to be generally the way you want to go. If you don't have a purple or gold bag, you might come up short and you might not have enough cells. Second to this is its overall ease of use. It requires an accurate shooter, and it just is not as forgiving as any marksman weapon or the longbow. It isn't necessarily the most competitive in time to kill, but the Rampage does make up for its weaker time to kill with a lot of other great attributes. First up though, if you like to play Fuse, then carrying thermites is definitely a viable strategy to give the Rampage a better time to kill and some utility with door busting. However, even without this, I think the Rampage is in a really good spot, as it is a really reliable weapon for its overall damage output. Its damage per mag is simply just put absurd, even at its base, and because of this, it can really farm enemy squads who are grouped up together. I think the Rampage is probably one of the best all-around weapons that is worthy of using if you want a weapon that can be decent at everything, but not top tier at anything specifically. Sticking with LMGs, we now have the L-Star, which is honestly in a very odd spot. First, the time to kill on this thing isn't bad, the range isn't bad, recoil control is pretty easy, and its most unique feature of not having to reload is pretty decent to keep yourself in the fight. The problem with the L-Star is that pretty much all the other energy weapons are better. Havoc is a faster time to kill, Nemesis has better range, Volt is better close up, so much like the Rampage, the L-Star can kind of do a little bit of everything from close to mid-range, but it's gonna get outclassed by basically everything that is ranked above it. If I had an A+ tier, I probably would start putting some of these weapons in it, but we now have the R301. I debated a little between putting the R301 in B or even all the way up to S, but I landed it right in the middle on A. The 301 is not as good as it was a year ago when it was nerfed, but even with its lower time to kill, the ease of use and simplicity of the R301 cannot be overlooked. The R301's low recoil makes it so easy to beam enemies at longer ranges, which improves your effective output. It is not as competitive as basically all the other assault rifles, but if you want one of the most pure weapons in the game that is the most prototypical assault rifle that is simply just going to perform, it is still an amazing option. Next up is the Massive Shotgun. The Massive and his big brother, the PK, are both pretty great secondaries right now. I find with solos being in the game, at least temporarily, lets this thing shine, as the Massive has always been the better third-party shotgun since you can reload one round at a time, keeping your damage output going. Hitting 11s can be frustrating, but this is due to user error, not the weapon. If you are looking for a very reliable team fighting weapon and overall secondary that will help alleviate bag space, then the Massive is a really good choice right now. Switching gears to the previously mentioned Peacekeeper, the Peacekeeper and Massive, to be honest, perform pretty similar in terms of how you will want to use them. The Massive is more forgiving due to its fire rate, and the Peacekeeper is probably the better option if you want the largest hit possible when you do pull this thing out. The Peacekeeper is not going to zap someone down like you would with a Volt or a Havoc, but it's still a great option to again conserve bag space, and if you are team fighting, hitting 80s or even up to 120 if you get a full headshot in there can lead to a nice amount of damage output and put enemies down. Heading to the mid-range, we have the 30-30 Repeater. The Repeater I find is in a very odd spot. Yes, it was nerfed via the Skull Piercer going into the vault, and last season's damage nerf and reload nerfs have made it not as strong as it once was. However, when looking at the other options like the G7 or the Longbow, I think the Repeater is still a very good weapon that can allow you to have consistent damage output with little downtime. I personally farmed my highest damage game this season, 4500, with this weapon. Just understand that it isn't going to have the same breaching or pure knock capability as it once did with the Skull Piercer being gone, and it's going to be more of a pressure weapon right now than necessarily a weapon that is going to get you a lot of knocks. The weapon that I think is slightly better than the 30 is going to be the Triple Take. The Triple Take did receive the boosted loader, which is a modest and probably unnecessary buff to the gun, but due to the nerfs around the Triple Take, kind of like the RE45 and some other weapons, the Triple Take is an incredible option for your damage farming needs. The 3 pellet or energy round spread of the Triple Take makes it so easy to use. Because of this, enemies have to stop and shield cell even if they get hit by 1/3 of the shot. If you connect a full body hit and or headshot, then you can do 60 or up to 100 plus damage, which is a wild amount of damage for a weapon that is this easy to use. The biggest drawback of the Triple Take I find to also be one of its most unique features, and it is going to be the charge up to get its full damage. And since you do really need to charge this thing up when you are at longer ranges, or at least reduce the spread, your damage output will be a little bit slower than say the Sentinel or the G7. Car SMG is up, and I debated whether to put this one in S or A, but I decided to put it in A tier because again, the weapons above it are simply just better right now. The Car is, however, 100% the better option over the R99. Not only is the damage per mag way superior, it also continues to have that added flexibility of either ammo or mag types, letting you get it kitted faster. The Car is still an incredible secondary option, and you can't go wrong with it. Just know that the meta isn't really favoring SMGs right now, and this is going to keep it slightly lower. Capping out the long list of A tier weapons, we do have the Alternator SMG, and the Alternator in some ways is like the R301 these days, as you can slap it 2 times or 1 to 2x on it, and it will have a decent output at the further side of close ranges while also still having a good time to kill up close. The Alternator is not that competitive when it comes to time to kill, which keeps it out of S tier, but what I do find it does really well is that if you are squad fighting, you have disrupt rounds, it can shed the shields very fast of your enemies, letting you have some increased power in these team fights. I find the Alternator works well in solos, and its forgiveness is definitely something to look at, as it is a breeze to use due to its low recoil, larger mag size, and total damage per magazine. We now move into S tier, which are the incredible and must-use weapons. Honestly, any pairing of these guns will do you quite well, and you can't go wrong with them. We will start with the biggest change of the season, and it is the Wingman returning back to the floor. The Wingman did see a nerf of losing magazines, so now it can only take an optic and the boosted loader, but in some weird ways, this actually simplifies the experience of using the Wingman, because as soon as you do pick it up, it's ready to go and very effective. It is kind of an anomaly right now, as those who are insane at the game can absolutely decimate enemies, and a team of Wingman users makes the game a little frustrating to go up against. Heady from a Wingman means over 170 damage, and this can happen in an instant and from pretty far. This is the real reason why the Wingman is still in S tier. It's a high skill, high rewarding weapon that everyone really needs to be proficient with. Our first real contender for the mid-range meta is up, and it's gonna be the Nemesis Burst AR. The Nemesis is one of the fastest killing weapons you can use at these ranges, and because of the hold the trigger down feature and you let it rip, this is gonna make it more usable for players that do not like burst weapons. The Nemesis isn't the greatest at close range hipfire, as ARs over the season have been nerfed in their hipfire accuracy, but I do find if you are close enough, holding the trigger down can completely obliterate enemies. The biggest drawback of the Nemesis is going to be its need for energy ammo, and you can really fly through ammo like none other with this weapon. Another energy gun is up and is the Volt. If you are looking for an SMG experience that will be the most rewarding and overall consistent, then this is going to be one of the two options you do need to consider. The Volt's recoil is easy, the damage output per mag is great, and the time to kill is no joke. I find the Volt to be similar to the R301, where it is the prototypical SMG you will want to use if you want a very reliable Apex experience. Unlike the Nemesis, I do think ammo conservation is way better with this gun, but I also find it troublesome that 3 energy guns, this, the Nemesis, the Havoc, and even the Triple Taken, sometimes the L-Star, are all on top of the meta, and it can make ammo semi-hard to come by, and sometimes when everyone is running these energy guns, you will have a problem splitting up rounds with your team. This is when the SMG I just hinted at comes into play, and it is the Prowler. The Prowler, I think, is the ultimate SMG for team fighting and taking on a lot of enemies at once. 35 rounds in a level 3 mag Prowler is just absurd, and it will allow you to be a menace in combat. I do think the Prowler is more of a controller weapon, so for M&K players, I think the Volt is the better option, but that doesn't mean the Prowler can't be viable for everyone. I also think the Prowler is just a necessary weapon to use this season, so everyone isn't begging for energy ammo all game long. I'll also just add that the Prowler is more of a run and gun, close range, hip firing type of weapon, where the Volt is your more traditional option. Either way, you can't go wrong with either of these two S tier SMGs. The Flatline absolutely is an S tier weapon this season, and this is due to a few factors. For one, the damage output you can do with a level 3 mag is absurd. Slower firing means better ammo consumption, and even if you don't have any attachments, I think this thing is pretty solid. It can compete in close range hip firing with some of the SMGs I just mentioned, and if you want the most traditional, best automatic experience for a mid-range weapon, then the Flatline is going to be the weapon you will want to look at. The biggest drawback for many will be that the Flatline is fairly difficult to use compared to the R301, but of course, with a little practice and time in, this thing will be very rewarding for you. As with every season and tier list I do want to have a few weapons in God tier, rating these as the best in the game, and you really just cannot go wrong with them. They're must use, have to use, you got to pick them up every time. We will start with the Devotion, newly in the care package. This thing reminds me of the old gold Devotion days before there were red weapons, and it's for a good reason, because this thing is insane right now. There's really nothing better than this gun. If you hold the trigger down and you crouch, you can get near perfect accuracy, which is nuts when you have an over 50 round magazine. You can actually wipe an entire team with one mag and still have some left over. The amount of reserve ammo you get, I also find to be very lenient, probably too much, and this weapon is by far the most common gun in the care package right now. If you previously did not like the Devotion, as many didn't because it wasn't great, it took a lot of attachments to make it kitted, and it still wasn't that good. You need to put that aside and absolutely get used to this powerhouse weapon again. It's going to be here for a while. The second best assault rifle right now in the game is still going to be the Hemlock. It's honestly so weird how Apex's meta can just gradually change as seasons go on, but the Hemlock is one of the most versatile weapons in the game, as close and mid-range burst firing can absolutely decimate someone down in an instant, get a few headshots in there, and you can do 100 damage with a singular burst. Close range hip firing is also pretty viable, and of course, and unlike the Nemesis, throwing this thing in a single shot to get some long range tap firing is an option you have as well. The Hemlock is a burst weapon, which of course will leave some people at odds with it, but you cannot discount the Hemlock right now. It is a great must-use weapon. The best weapon in the entire game that is not called the Devotion is going to be the Havoc. Much like many of the other ones that we have spoken about so far, it is really the nerfs around the meta that has caused this thing to be what it is. Honestly, don't love how we keep nerfing everything. Something is good, so you nerf it and then nerf something else and you keep moving on. It does make a lot of guns just not feel great to use anymore, which is a shame. I think it will be a problem Apex is going to have if they keep nerfing guns. Hopefully we get some buffs to certain guns in the near future. Regardless though, the Havoc is an SMG in an assault rifle form, which means you got assault rifle range with an SMG TTK. 36 rounds for an SMG like weapon is absurd. Its hip fire is solid. Turbocharger makes it one of the fastest and limiting weapons in the game, and this is one that you just can simply not avoid using. Be sure to drop a like if you enjoyed, and check out this video for the best legends in Apex. Happy gaming, legends.